Tag TV and Tag Radio be seen and heard by both technology users and technology producers throughout the state of Georgia and around the world. Low cost, big benefits, powerhouse online branded video and audio has arrived. Tag TV, Tag Radio, there's a lot more to know. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. This week, it's committee action that's all the flurry as some high-profile bills start working their way through the General Assembly. Bills that directly benefit the state's industry startup community, like the Angel Tax and Invest Georgia. However, some legislation that's in the works has pundits thinking, well, possible negative impact on the greater technology industry. Greetings, everyone. It's Tuesday, February 12, 2013, and this is a special 2013 Georgia State General Assembly Government Affairs edition of Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. I'm your guest host, Frank Baia. Back with us, TAG's Government Affairs Task Force Chair, founder and principal of Lepore Associates, Loretta Lepore, a nationally recognized media expert, past spokesperson for former Governor Sonny Perdue, and an award-winning journalist and anchor with CNN for over a decade. Loretta's abundance of insight, talent, and leadership give her an advantageous and rare perspective. As a seasoned professional, she has also served as senior advisor of the government affairs practice of one of the city's largest, most influential law firms. And her portfolio, it includes public strategy, crisis management, and an array of public affairs issues. From the rapid legislative action to lunch with the Farm Bureau, it's another week filled with the impact of state politics. Let's get the 2013 session Tech Talk going and get us up to speed on how things are proceeding for the startup community to the growing technology industry, all under the Gold Dome. As we speak with political expert and state government recognized thought leader, TAG's Task Force Chair for Government Affairs, Loretta Lepore. Loretta, welcome to Tech Talk.
Hello, Frank. It's good to be back with you today.
How time flies when you're having fun.
That's right.
We spoke just a couple. Right. Well, we spoke just a couple of weeks ago about the start of the session. Bring us up to speed on how things are proceeding under the Gold Dome.
Well, the session is moving at a relatively fast clip this year. Legislators have been very focused, and both the House and the Senate have agreed on agendas, and we've seen some large pieces of legislation already clear. One has already made its way to the governor's desk, and that's the bed tax, as it's referred to, which really would help hospitals, particularly those that treat indigent care workers, and it created a bit of a hole in the budget. This bill would allow for the drawdown of hundreds of millions of dollars of federal funds to fill that hole. So that allowed lawmakers also to quickly move on to the fiscal 13 amended budget. That's the current year that the government is working in, the state government is working under. Mm-hmm. And there was not very much flexibility as revenues have been fairly flat, so they were able to kind of make a few tweaks here and there and move that bill right on through over to the Senate. So it's next on to the fiscal 14 budget and some other pieces of legislation, some of relevance to the technology industry in particular.
Well, obviously the Angel Tax Credit, the Invest Georgia, those are two things that we had talked about before. Let's revisit those two bills. You briefed us the last time about the benefit to the industry startup community. Maybe tell us a little bit about that and maybe update us on what the status is.
Sure. So the Angel Tax Credit legislation has been introduced, and that is currently House Bill 272, if anybody out there wants to look it up. But essentially what this does is it just extends the Angel Investment Tax Credit that is already on the books. It was put in place in 2010, and it expires at the end of this year. Essentially, it incents high-wealth individuals to invest in those small, early-stage companies with fewer than 20 employees, revenue under $500,000 annually. And the investors, in turn, get a 35% income tax credit, which is capped at $50,000 per individual, and an overall cap, statewide cap of $10 million. So once that cap is reached, the state does not allow any more credits. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're looking forward to getting there for sure. And so that's pretty much the update on the angel tax credit.
Well, I guess I'd be remiss not to ask a question about anything negatively impacting the technology community. Is there any legislation in the works?
You know, there are a couple of bills that were floated last year and have made their way back again this year, and these really would impact those companies, technology companies in particular, that want to do business with the state. They affect the state procurement process. And what they would do is limit the companies that would want to do business. So while on the surface, the legislation promotes companies that are American companies, Georgia-based companies. In fact, what they do is they restrict companies that have any overseas operations. So if a company were bidding on a contract with the state, for example, a technology contract, and it involves services, if any of those services, say a call center, were coming from overseas, then that company would not be allowed to bid on that work. TAG has taken a position against this legislation, as they did last year, because they see it as an impediment to free commerce, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the things that obviously in the news just really almost every single day is the bipartisan nature of the federal government and how difficult things have been in terms of getting, quote-unquote, anything done. I guess I kind of want to hit you from left field, but being such an insider and on the ground as you are, give us kind of your personal insight to the personality of this particular legislature. Cooperative, difficult? Is it getting along? Are things getting as productive as you would have expected them to be right from the onset?
Well, I think the unique, what's different here in Georgia than at the federal government is that both chambers, the House and the Senate, are controlled by Republicans, as is the governor's office. And that doesn't always mean that all parties get along. But in this case, we have seen quite a bit of cooperation in all three pockets of the Capitol. So there's quite a bit of dialogue going on between the governor, the Speaker of the House, and the Lieutenant Governor, and that frankly is why they've been able to move some of this legislation so quickly, because there's been a lot of planning around the process, around the issues that might come up, and the timing of moving certain pieces of legislation. So I would say by and large, very cooperative, very much unlike what's going on in Washington.
At the risk of being political, and we certainly wouldn't want you to go there by any stretch, the other side of it, though, is the fact that, every once in a while when you hear something as logical as everybody working together and it all being kind of one-sided to a degree, and certainly we understand, quote-unquote, the concept of a democracy and the need for due process and obviously the weighing out of everybody's opinion, but it's kind of nice to really hear that when it is working and does work the way it's supposed to, how efficient and fast it actually can be. Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to add there is, I think, too, what we're looking at is, and not to be political, but, there's a balance that you have to maintain when you are the party in power and you are the party that has control in all of the chambers, and that is to make sure that there's fair airing of the legislation that's coming through. So, I would say that there has been fair hearing of the legislation as well. I think one of the reasons that there's been some, the ability to move things quickly is really because of where we are economically as a state, and, we're just not seeing enough revenue being generated in the state to allow for large conversations about what to do with excess, revenue. It's really just making ends meet at this point. And when you get into that situation, there's not a lot of decision making. We've just got to do what we've got to do to make sure the citizens and the taxpayers are being taken care of in a way that they expect to be taken care of.
But, Loretta, you're saying something that, again, sounds so logical, and I think any of our listeners, any of our members clearly understand it, and yet the other side of it is we've seen the fact that they haven't necessarily had revenues and spend a whole lot of time talking about what to do or not to do with spending when they didn't really have enough income to make the kind of decisions they needed to make. So once again, hats off. I mean, obviously you're as much a spectator as you are a quasi-participant, but the other side of it is I think we have a lot to be proud of and a lot to be happy about as far as this particular legislation and this particular governor, without question. From your standpoint, I think that's pretty clear, the timing factor, but when do you foresee the legislators getting out of town this year?
Well, it has been expressed that their goal is to get out of town before Easter or by Easter. So we'll have a benchmark week coming up the first week in March. March the 5th is what the day before crossover day. And crossover day is the day in which any type of tax legislation must cross from the House to the Senate, and becomes a very pivotal day because there's just a tremendous amount of legislation moving. The bulk of the legislation is moving from one chamber to the other prior to that day. And then from there, you have only 10 days left in the legislative session. So assuming that, there's no complexities, there's nothing coming out of left field from Washington, they should be in pretty good shape to meet that target.
Well, Loretta, obviously, I think for us to have gained so much insight early on, right at the beginning of the session, now we're getting a benchmark right in the middle of most of the activity, especially the ones that surely interest our listening audience and our TAG members. But also we're going to invite you back so that we finally finish the rest of the story, as they say, and hear how it all completes up. So thank you so much for taking time. Thank you for the great work you're doing on the ground and the great efforts that are happening with the TAG Task Force, but also for what you do in the role that you play. And thank you for joining us today again for a briefing on Tech Talk.
Great. Thanks, Frank. Great. Thanks.